The wind tore through the pines like a living thing, dragging snow in long silver veils across the narrow trail as Hannah stumbled forward, her boots sodden, her breath breaking in ragged bursts, and the satchel clutched to her chest as if it held her final thread to life. Behind her, the shouts of the settlement had faded into the blizzard's roar, but the memory of their words still burned in her mind. Banished, they had said, for siding with savages, for defending a Lakota boy they had branded a thief. The cold gnawed at her bones, each step a battle until her strength buckled and she collapsed into a drift beside a half-frozen creek, the snow swallowing her in a slow, suffocating embrace. Her vision dimmed, the edges closing in, when a shadow moved between the trees, a towering figure wrapped in a fur-lined coat, hair tangled to his shoulders, beard crusted with frost, eyes the deep brown of rich earth. Beside him moved something lower, swifter, a massive wolfdog, its amber eyes gleaming through the flurry, its breath steaming like smoke from another world. The animal circled once, low growl vibrating in its chest, before nudging her limp hand with a wet nose, the heat of its breath grounding her fading mind. The man knelt, his movements deliberate yet unexpectedly gentle, turning her onto her back and brushing snow from her face with a gloved hand, his gaze assessing, as though weighing her worth against some silent measure only he knew. Then, without a word, he lifted her into his arms, her head falling against the broad wall of his chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat loud in her ears. The world tilted and swayed as he carried her, the wolfdog pacing alongside, its amber gaze flicking from her to the shadows of the forest as though guarding them both. Her mind, fogged with cold and exhaustion, caught fragments of his voice, deep, low, unhurried, but the words slipped past her, their meaning lost to the storm. The last thing she felt before darkness swallowed her whole was the press of fur around her and the soft thud of paws keeping pace, as if the animal understood that until she could stand again, she belonged under its watch. Hannah woke to the muted crackle of a fire and the faint scent of pine smoke, her body cocooned beneath a pile of heavy furs that trapped warmth against skin still aching from the cold's bite. Her lashes clumped with frost as her eyes adjusted to the dim amber light. She was in a small log cabin, its walls chinked tight against the storm, the air carrying the mingled scent of wood smoke, leather, and something simmering over the hearth. Outside, the wind howled faintly, muted by thick timber, but inside the only sound was the soft scrape of metal on cast iron and the rhythmic thump of paws against wood. The wolfdog lay sprawled near the foot of her bed, head resting on massive forepaws, eyes fixed on her with a steady, almost knowing watchfulness that sent a strange shiver through her. Across the room, the mountain man crouched by the fire, his broad back hunched, his coat hung on a nearby peg to reveal the heavy layers beneath, his long hair spilling over shoulders thick as oak trunks. He glanced at her once, his gaze unreadable but not unkind, then turned back to the pot, ladling out a steaming broth into a wooden bowl. When he crossed the space between them, the floorboards creaking under his weight, Hannah instinctively tried to push herself up, but her arms trembled and collapsed beneath her, her strength still gone. Without speaking, he knelt, slid one hand behind her back to lift her slightly, and brought the spoon to her lips. The first taste was hot, rich, and foreign, and though her pride flickered for a moment, hunger won, and she let him feed her, each mouthful chased by the wolfdog's quiet, approving blink. When she tried to thank him, only a hoarse rasp escaped her throat, and the realization that her voice was gone tightened panic in her chest. His eyes met hers for a brief moment, as if to say he already knew. Then he rose and stepped to the small window, parting the hide curtain with 2 fingers. Snow swirled outside, but his attention was fixed lower, scanning something hidden from her view. The wolfdog rose in the same instant, moving to the door with a low growl that vibrated in the stillness, its hackles lifting. Hannah's breath caught, a sudden understanding pressing in on her. Whatever had driven her into this wilderness hadn't been lost in the storm. It was out there, and it had found their trail. The mountain man's shadow loomed against the cabin wall as he moved to the door, his massive hand closing around the wooden latch while the wolfdog pressed its nose to the gap, breathing in short, sharp bursts that spoke of more than just curiosity. He opened it only enough to slip outside, snow sweeping in around his boots before the wind claimed the moment and the door thudded shut again. Hannah strained to listen, hearing nothing but the faint creak of snow under heavy steps and the low rumble of the wolfdog pacing inside, torn between following its master and guarding her. Minutes stretched, her mind conjuring every possible threat. Bears, wolves, the men from the settlement, until the latch lifted again and the mountain man stepped back in, his face carved in stone, snow clinging to his beard. He didn't speak, but his eyes flicked to the wolfdog, and the animal slipped out without hesitation. When he finally looked at her, there was no need for words. Something had been confirmed out there, something that made the air inside the cabin feel smaller. He set his rifle by the door, then crouched in front of her, reaching into his coat to pull out a small leather pouch. From it he drew a carved token, shaped like a feather, but stained a deep, unnatural red. He held it out for her to see, his gaze locking onto hers as if asking if she understood. She did. It was the mark the men from the settlement used when they wanted someone gone for good, a warning they left behind before finishing the job. Panic jolted through her veins, but his massive hand closed over hers, grounding her with the steady pressure. The wolfdog returned moments later, fur dusted with snow, and dropped something at the man's feet. A scrap of cloth, torn and wet, smelling faintly of smoke and sweat. Hannah recognized it instantly. It belonged to one of the men who had jeered as she was driven from the settlement, the one who had spat at her for defending the Lakota boy. The mountain man studied the cloth, then looked toward the fire, his jaw tightening in silent decision. Without a word, he began packing a worn leather satchel, his movements precise, efficient, leaving no question in her mind. They wouldn't be staying here long. Her heart thudded against her ribs, a dozen questions burning her throat. But she had no voice to ask them, and perhaps it didn't matter. Whatever was coming, it had found her trail, and now it had found his. Before dawn's first pale light touched the pines, the mountain man had the fire banked, the furs rolled, and the cabin stripped of anything that could be tied to him. Hannah sat on the edge of the bed, her legs trembling under the effort of standing. But he didn't ask if she could walk. He simply handed her a thick wool cloak lined with fur and waited until she pulled it around her shoulders. The wolfdog paced at the door, muscles quivering with readiness, ears flicking toward the forest as though it already knew the direction they'd take. When the man finally opened the door, the cold rushed in like a wave, biting through the warm air, the snow outside deep enough to swallow her boots to the ankle. He didn't lead her into the open trail. Instead, he guided her through a dense patch of spruce, each step breaking untouched powder. The wolfdog moved ahead, silent but alert, occasionally glancing back to ensure she followed. The man's hand was firm on her elbow when the snowdrifts rose higher, his strength making the path possible where her own would have failed. For hours, they climbed through terrain that grew steeper, the wind combing the treetops while flakes swirled in lazy spirals. Hannah's breath came in ragged clouds, her thoughts torn between the burn in her legs and the gnawing fear of what trailed them. At last, they reached a narrow shelf of rock that overlooked a frozen gorge, and there he stopped, scanning the white expanse below. His gaze was searching, calculating. The wolfdog stiffened, its nose lifting to the wind before it let out a single, low bark. He crouched beside it, following its line of sight, and Hannah's stomach knotted. Far below, barely visible against the snow, were dark specks moving in a staggered line. Even from this distance, she knew it wasn't wildlife. The way they moved was too purposeful. The man's hand brushed the rifle slung over his shoulder, but he didn't draw it. Instead, he led her along the cliffside, every turn and bend chosen to keep them hidden from the valley below. Hours passed in silence, except for the crunch of boots and the wolfdog's light tread, until at last he guided her into the mouth of a narrow cave hidden behind a curtain of rock and ice. Inside, the air was still and dry, the snow muffled outside. The wolfdog lay at the entrance, eyes on the gorge as if standing watch. Hannah knew without needing to be told they wouldn't be safe here for long, but for tonight, this was the only place the cold and the men couldn't reach them. The cave was little more than a hollow carved by time and ice, its walls cold enough to sting bare skin, but it held a stillness that the forest could not. The mountain man set down the satchel and knelt to build a small, smokeless fire from shavings he carved off a block of pitchy pine, his hands working with deliberate quiet. The wolfdog refused to lie down, instead pacing the mouth of the cave, every few moments stepping outside far enough to scan the gorge before slipping back in, ears swiveling to catch sounds Hannah couldn't hear. She watched the man's face in the dim firelight. It was a face built for stone, the deep lines and weathered skin unmoving, but his eyes betrayed a constant calculation. When the faint, distant sound of a shout carried up through the frozen air, he stilled, his head tilting slightly. Another shout followed, closer this time, and the wolfdog's lips curled in a soundless snarl. He rose without hesitation, doused the fire with a handful of snow, and moved to the mouth of the cave. From his coat, he pulled a pair of snowshoes and strapped them on, then crouched in front of her. He pointed toward the far side of the cave, where a narrow crevice wound upward into darkness, and made a small motion with his hand. Wait. Before she could protest, he was gone, the wolfdog following with a silent bound, their shapes vanishing into the storm beyond. Minutes stretched, the muffled shouts outside growing sharper, the crunch of boots echoing faintly against the cliff walls. Hannah pressed herself into the shadowed crevice, her breath shallow, heart hammering. Then, through the howling wind, came a sudden eruption of barking, loud and fierce, followed by the crack of snow breaking loose somewhere above. Shouts turned to curses, boots scuffling against ice, and then silence swallowed everything again. She waited, the weight of stillness pressing until it felt unbearable, before finally hearing the crunch of returning steps. The wolfdog appeared first, snow clinging to its fur, a fresh nick bleeding along one ear. The mountain man followed, his breath heavy but his expression unreadable, though his eyes met hers with the briefest flicker of reassurance. He didn't speak, only motioned for her to follow. Whatever he had done out there had bought them time, but she knew it hadn't ended the chase. As they climbed the narrow crevice out of the cave, the wind roared louder, and for the first time Hannah wondered if the mountain itself might become their ally, or their trap. The crevice spat them out onto a high ridge where the world seemed nothing but white and wind. The snow swept into knife-sharp drifts that scraped against their legs with every step. The mountain man moved with sure-footed precision, each placement of his snowshoes deliberate, as though he had memorized every contour of this dangerous pass long before winter had claimed it. The wolfdog loped ahead, a streak of gray against the blinding white, pausing at intervals to test the air before pushing forward. Hannah followed close, her cloak snapping in the wind, each breath burning her lungs. Below the ridge lay a sheer drop into a chasm where ice glimmered like blue glass, the sound of it cracking faintly beneath the roar of the wind. She dared not look down for long. One misstep here would mean vanishing into that frozen grave. The man halted suddenly, raising a hand. The wolfdog froze mid-step, ears forward, body taut. Hannah strained to see what he had noticed, but the wall of white ahead offered no answers. Then, faint but distinct, the sound reached her. Hoofbeats, muffled by the snow but unmistakable, coming from the slope below. The man's jaw clenched. He knelt in the snow, pressing his gloved hand against the surface as though feeling the vibration through the mountain itself. Without a word, he veered sharply to the left, leading them toward a jagged outcropping of rock that jutted into the pass like a splinter. They slipped into the shadow it cast, the wind dying slightly in its shelter, and Hannah realized what he was doing. He was pulling them off the main trail, forcing anyone following to lose their tracks in the confusion of wind-swept snow. For the next hour, they moved in a weaving, almost nonsensical path, circling through drifts and doubling back until she could no longer tell which direction they'd come from. The wolfdog's tail flicked in a quick, almost satisfied motion each time the wind erased their trail behind them. By the time they emerged on the far side of the outcropping, the hoofbeats had faded, replaced by the endless sigh of the wind. The man didn't slow until the ridge dipped toward a narrow valley, where skeletal aspens clung stubbornly to life, their bark pale as bone. He guided her into their shelter and finally stopped, his breath clouding the air. The wolfdog sat at his side, gaze fixed behind them as if daring anything to follow. They had shaken the hunters for now, but the way he scanned the horizon told Hannah this was only the beginning. The aspen grove gave the illusion of safety, their pale trunks standing like silent sentinels against the snow, but the mountain man's posture never eased. He moved with deliberate care, steering Hannah toward the densest cluster of trees, where wind-scoured drifts muffled their tracks. The wolfdog padded ahead, nose low, weaving through the trees until it stopped abruptly, one paw suspended mid-step. A low, guttural growl rumbled from its chest, the kind that spoke of danger unseen but certain. The man stepped forward, scanning the grove, his eyes narrowing as they fixed on a line in the snow. Not a natural drift, but a faint, deliberate indentation, the kind left by a rope or trip line buried just beneath the powder. He crouched and brushed away the snow with his gloved fingers, revealing the taut cord stretched across the narrow path. Beyond it, almost invisible unless you knew where to look, a series of crude stakes jutted from the ground, sharpened to points and hidden beneath a thin blanket of snow. Hannah's breath caught. Someone had prepared this place, and not for animals. Without a word, he stood, guiding her in a slow arc away from the path, his eyes darting between the ground and the open spaces between trees. More signs emerged, a broken branch at waist height, a small patch of snow that looked too even, too untouched. Each one was a warning. They were walking through a net of traps. The wolfdog suddenly veered right, moving quickly toward the edge of the grove, its tail stiff, every movement urgent. The man followed, quickening his pace, and Hannah forced herself to match their speed, despite the burn in her legs. Just as they reached the tree line, a sound cut through the still air. A single, sharp whistle. It came from somewhere behind them, and almost immediately, an answering whistle echoed from the opposite side. Hannah's stomach dropped. Whoever was hunting them had them surrounded. The man didn't hesitate. With a curt gesture, he directed her toward a narrow ravine cutting through the snow ahead, a hidden path that plunged steeply downward. They half slid, half ran into its shelter, the walls rising around them and blocking the wind, though the muffled thud of boots hitting snow followed above. The wolfdog bounded ahead, every few steps glancing back to ensure they were close. When they finally reached the bottom, the man pressed them into a hollow under an overhang, his rifle in hand, eyes locked on the rim above. The hunters hadn't reached them yet, but the trap had already been sprung. The hollow beneath the overhang was barely large enough for the three of them, its low ceiling forcing Hannah to crouch against the icy wall while the mountain man knelt at the entrance, rifle balanced loosely in his hands. The wolfdog stood just ahead of him, its hackles raised, body quivering with alert tension. Above, faint silhouettes moved along the rim of the ravine, their shapes blurred by drifting snow. The man's gaze never left them, his breathing steady despite the danger. Then a cascade of snow spilled down from the rim as a figure leaned over, peering into the ravine. The wolfdog let out a sharp, warning bark, the sound echoing off the stone walls before darting out into the open. Hannah's heart lurched, certain it was running to its death, but the animal moved with a precision born of countless hunts. It bounded halfway up the slope, its bark turning into a deep, resonant snarl that drew the attention of the men above. One shouted something harsh, leaning farther over to aim, but the wolfdog lunged higher, knocking loose a curtain of snow from an overhanging ledge. The weight of it crashed down in a blinding cloud, obscuring the men's line of sight and sending one tumbling to his knees. The mountain man used the moment, rising in a fluid motion and firing once, not to kill, but to shatter the branch of a pine above the rim. It snapped under the shot, sending a heap of heavy snow down onto the ledge where their pursuers stood. The men cursed, scrambling to regain their footing, but the wolfdog was already retreating, weaving down the slope toward the hollow. As it slipped back inside, its flanks heaving, the man reached down to ruffle the fur between its ears, a brief acknowledgement before his attention returned upward. The snow above muffled their hunters' voices, but the sound of movement told him they weren't giving up. He motioned for Hannah to follow, and began moving deeper into the ravine, the wolfdog leading with its head low, nose working. They wove between icy boulders and under low arches of rock, their steps careful but quick. For a brief moment, Hannah felt the illusion of safety in the twisting stone corridors, until a new sound cut through the air, a metallic clink ahead, followed by the unmistakable click of a rifle being cocked. The danger wasn't behind them anymore. The enemy was waiting in front. The sound of the rifle's cocking echoed like a death knell through the frozen ravine, stopping Hannah in her tracks. The mountain man's hand shot out, steadying her against the rock wall while his other slowly lowered his own weapon. His eyes flicked to the wolfdog, and the animal seemed to understand, easing forward in a crouch until it disappeared around the bend ahead. A voice rang out from the shadows, low, cold, and edged with triumph, telling them to come out slow, no sudden moves. Hannah's pulse thundered in her ears. She could see the faint glint of metal between two boulders, a rifle barrel waiting. The man stepped forward into view, his broad frame blocking her from sight, his posture deceptively relaxed. He spoke in a calm, almost conversational tone, asking if they were after him or the woman. The pause that followed told her the question had struck its mark. The voice answered, "Both." That was all he needed to know. Without shifting his stance, the mountain man let his weight fall subtly to one side, crunching the snow beneath his boot in a deliberate rhythm. 2 steps, pause, 1 step, pause. Hannah realized too late it was a signal. A sudden blur streaked from the shadows as the wolfdog lunged from the opposite side, its jaws snapping on the arm holding the rifle. The man was already moving, surging forward in a powerful rush that knocked the gunman backward into the snow. The rifle discharged harmlessly into the rock, the echo swallowed by the wind. Another man appeared from behind, but the mountain man's elbow caught him in the ribs before he could bring his weapon up, sending him sprawling. The wolfdog held its ground, teeth bared, keeping the first man pinned. Hannah's breath came in sharp bursts as she watched the fight unfold in a flurry of movement. Snow spraying, boots slipping, grunts of pain muffled by the cold air. Within moments, the mountain man had stripped the attackers of their weapons and sent them stumbling back up the ravine, their eyes wide with the realization they were no match for him here. He didn't chase them. Instead, he turned immediately to Hannah, checking her for injury with a gentleness that contrasted the violence just moments before. The wolfdog pressed against her side, as if reassuring her they were safe. For now. But the mountain man's gaze lingered on the path ahead, where the ravine narrowed into a final twisting climb. "We move," he said, voice quiet but firm. And in that moment, Hannah understood. They were not yet out of the mountain's grasp. But this was the man, and the animal, who would see her through. The climb out of the ravine was brutal, the snow deepening with every step until it swallowed their legs to the knee. The mountain man moved first, breaking a path with the steady, relentless pace of someone who had learned long ago that survival meant never stopping. Hannah followed close, her breath burning in her chest, each exhale forming a white cloud that instantly froze on the ends of her hair. The wolfdog trotted just ahead, its ears swiveling at every sound, nose lifting to test the wind. Above them, the sky was breaking open into streaks of pale gold as the sun fought through the clouds, casting a light that made the snow sparkle like glass. For a moment, it looked almost peaceful, until a rifle crack split the air. The man dropped instantly, pulling Hannah down into the drift beside him, snow stinging her face as it exploded from the bullet's impact. Another shot rang out, the sound bouncing off the walls of the slope. They were close to the ridge, but someone had taken position there, waiting. The man scanned the slope, eyes narrowing, then shifted his rifle into the crook of his arm. Without a word, he motioned for the wolfdog. The animal seemed to understand instantly, slipping into the undergrowth to the left, vanishing into a curtain of frost-laden branches. The silence that followed was sharp, almost painful, broken only by Hannah's shallow breathing. Then a sudden snarl erupted from the ridge above, followed by a startled shout. The gunfire stopped. The mountain man didn't waste the opening. He surged forward, hauling Hannah up the slope with powerful strides, snow spraying behind them. They crested the ridge just as the wolfdog reappeared, teeth bared and muzzle dusted with snow, the would-be shooter scrambling away through the trees. On the far side, the land dropped into a broad, sunlit valley where a plume of smoke curled from the chimney of a distant cabin. Relief hit Hannah so hard her knees nearly buckled. She felt the man's hand steady her again, his grip warm even through the cold. "You're safe now," he said, his voice low but certain. She looked at him, the man they had called dangerous, the man meant to be her punishment, and saw only the quiet strength of someone who had carried her through every mile, every threat, without once letting go. The wolfdog brushed against her leg, tail giving a single wag as if sealing the moment. Together they started down into the valley, leaving the mountains and their dangers behind, the snow crunching underfoot in a rhythm that spoke of survival, and of something new taking root between them.